One of the most common questions that people have about our glamping operation, Ferncrest, is what are the utilities like? And because we bought an old campground and we converted it into our glamping operation, a lot of people assume that we had it easy, that all the utilities were there and we just had to convert the camping spots into glamping sites and everything was going to be gravy. The reality is that we bought a campground that had less than 100 amps of service, which, by the way, that's not a lot. A normal house has at least 200, if not more. And so having less than 100 amps, I think we thought it was about 80 amps, is not much electricity for a commercial business. We had 2 failing septic systems that have since been replaced. And we also had a pump, a well, that was more than 50 years old. We definitely inherited a lot of old infrastructure that we didn't know it was as bad as it was until we got in there and started rolling up our sleeves. But the reality was that we had to do a lot of work to get it to where it is today. And the one thing that we really had to figure out was the electricity, because glamping, unlike traditional rustic camping, requires electricity. That is probably the most important part of a glamping operation, is to have power in the tents so that, yes, people can charge their devices, but they can also have things like mini fridges, microwaves, and air conditioning. And that is where our story begins, which was we were trying to figure out the electricity and ultimately realized that we didn't have enough, and that location that not enough electricity was in was also not ideal for all the tents that we wanted to power up. So a couple months before we opened, we started to poke around and try to figure out, okay, how are we going to upgrade this? Yes, that wasn't enough time, and we realized that very shortly after when we called the electric company and said, hey, we'd like to upgrade the electrical service. Can you flip a switch? Can you turn on more electricity for us so that we can get more juice into this campground? And they were like, you got to upgrade the telephone pole that electricity is coming into your property on with a new transformer. I'm like, what's a transformer? It's those boxes, those like cylindrical boxes that are on a telephone pole that I guess the electricity goes into and then transforms it out. Don't ask me, I'm not an electrician, and you're gonna learn that very shortly as I explain what our solution ended up being. So they said that transformer is not gonna be able to give you more juice. You need to get a new one, but COVID backups are still in play. All the supply chains were still messed up. So they said it's probably about 6 months for us to get a transformer. What? 6 months? We open in less than 2. How the heck are we gonna make this happen? We need more power to this property or else we are absolutely screwed. We cannot have dome tents that don't have air conditioning in them. Dome tents they need air conditioning, okay? I'll just put it that way. And so ultimately we started to really get worried. Had already put a couple $100,000 of all of our money essentially that we had made previously from the Rex Hotel that we had started, and any savings and pinching pennies together basically to get to where we were then. And we had to open or else we were going to fail and we were going to lose everything. So we started looking around for other solutions, knowing that the power company could not be expedited. It wasn't that they couldn't actually do the work, it was that they actually didn't have the part to do what we needed done. So I started looking online and started looking at off-grid power solutions, wind, solar, rain, gosh, anything that I could potentially imagine I was looking into. Hydroelectric, we have a little creek, it's seasonal though, so it's not running year round, so that wouldn't work. Wind, man, those things are just big and heavy and hard and expensive. Solar was interesting because we knew that it was going to be a seasonal campground operation, so at least we knew that the sun was going to be good in the summertime. It's hard in the wintertime, but we knew we were going to have enough sun. But the biggest issue is this was a forested campground. There was really good sun outside of the campground, but that would require the solar panels to be really far away in the front field and then running wires all the way into the tents, which would be hundreds of feet, hundreds of yards even. It started to dawn on me that we didn't have any clear-cut solution for what we needed to give power to specifically the 6 dome tents that we were launching with that season. As I started to assess it, we started to realize that the best area that we could potentially do solar would be the storage area where we brought shipping containers into next to our parking lot. It was close enough to the dome tents, and we realized that by clearing a handful of more trees around those shipping containers, we would have enough direct sunlight from a southern direction. So it turns out solar panels need to be tilted in the northern hemisphere. They need to be tilted towards the south slightly because that's where this direction the sun comes in. It arcs over the southern sky versus going directly overhead. And that changes, right, as the season goes along. Again, I'm not an expert, but what I am is a scrappy entrepreneur that wanted to figure something out. So what I ultimately did is I dove in the ethers of the internet and looked at all the different off-grid cabin solutions that people were running and looking at all the different solutions that people had. I would have to say that there was no real good resource on running a larger commercial operation off of solar. But what I did find was that there was a lot of good solutions in the solar world that had just come about in the last few years. And we looked at solutions from companies like Blue Eddy, Anchor, Goal Zero. There's a lot of different companies out there that are doing like home backup battery solutions that can be powered by solar. But the one that actually stood out the most was called EcoFlow. And EcoFlow stood out because they made batteries that could be daisy chained together to create a larger battery, essentially. So multiple batteries together, then the output of the electricity would be sufficient for what I thought would be sufficient for our tents. So I bought a DIY solar kit. I bought 8 solar panels, 335 watt solar panels that I was going to mount to the top of the shipping containers. So those mounted up there with some lumber. We basically made some brackets and some grids, tilted it to the southern sky. And then we ran the DC wire, DC being the type of electricity that comes from solar, into the pump house. And the pump house is where we were going to have the batteries stored. And so those 4 batteries daisy chained together were then ultimately going to power the 6 tents that were directly behind the pump house. And that's what we did. We basically spent about $20,000 on all of this equipment, which was, by the way, it was a big chunk of change, and we were at the end of our project, so we were definitely running out. So that went on a credit card, but we knew that without the electricity, those tents were essentially useless. And we ultimately were able to get that powered up literally days before opening. Flipped that switch on, turned the solar on, and we had power. Yeah, we had power. We were charging devices, we had the mini fridges powered up, we were able to run a microwave, and we tested the air conditionings even, and that seemed to work as well. But again, it was still earlier in the summer in like June where things were not that hot. So the electrical draw from the air conditioning was not that much. It was somewhat party mode. We were thinking that the off-grid solution was going to do what we needed to get done, and this could be a great solution for the rest of the campground as well as we expanded it. But those hot summer days came, and those hot summer days started to show cracks in our DIY solar dream. And the reality was that we didn't have enough input and output of power to provide enough electricity for people to run air conditionings when it was really hot. And as a hospitality business, that's pretty important in the summertime. If we're advertising that they were going to have air conditioning, and then, a few hours into the night, once the sun is gone and no devices, those batteries are not charging anymore, and those air conditionings turn off, it's not a good thing. So I was scrambling in those hot August weeks where it's peak summer and those air conditioners are cranking at full blast. I was pulling extension cords from the grid power, the limited grid power that we had. I was running extension cords through the actual campground, like 200 feet of extension cords to get to individual tents and then power up the air conditionings. It was ridiculous, but I have to say it worked. We survived. We were able to divert the very limited under 100 amps of grid power that we had over to the tents. Yes, we tripped the main power multiple times as we figured out the configuration of how to get that done. But between the solar providing energy to a few and then the grid power providing an energy to another few tents, we got through. But what it did make me realize was that the DIY solar solution was not going to be something that we were going to be utilizing in the second season, because that's no way to run a hospitality business. Although DIY solar might be great for an off-grid cabin solution where it's your own cabin and you can moderate and monitor that electrical usage, we're running a hospitality business. People are spending $200-300 a night to stay in those tents. We can't be like, oh, yo, it's 10 o'clock. You got to turn down your air conditioning to save power for the next few hours so that you don't sweat tonight. No, it doesn't work like that. We need to provide reliable, consistent electricity on an ongoing basis for a business like this. So as much as it pains me to say, the off-grid power solution failed us, and it did not provide what we needed for our business. Now, that's not to say that solar or other alternative energy cannot be utilized for a campground or a glamping operation, because they can. There's plenty of examples out there where people have solar setups that are providing electricity for an off-grid hospitality solution. That being said, those are significantly more expensive than the $20,000 that we spend. You could definitely do what is needed to power Ferncrest with solar, even in the mountains of Pennsylvania where there's trees and it's a little bit more hard to manage. But you would need a much larger space for solar panels. So not just our shipping containers, but we would probably have to utilize a lot of our field out front. And then also the actual cost and infrastructure, batteries, trenching, everything that would go into that would be significantly more expensive than what we spent. So we'd be looking at probably 10 times that $20,000 investment just to get enough electricity for, say, those 610s. So if you have to have off-grid solution, then it's possible. But the actual cost of doing so is still cost prohibitive, in my opinion, based upon what you could get from grid power, even if you have to spend money trenching and getting that grid power in. The reason for that is really in the batteries and the solar panels. The batteries are more expensive than the solar panels, by the way. A battery like we had was about $3,000 a battery, right? And we had to get 4 of those, 3, 6, 9, 12. So $12,000 just in batteries. And then we had a few $1,000s in solar panels, and then everything else, got it to about $20,000. There's batteries that this same company, EcoFlow, now makes, since we've initially done it, that are like $5,000, $6,000 a battery that can also be daisy chained together. And ultimately, I've done the math, I would need probably like a similar amount of those, 4, 5, 6 of those batteries to provide enough energy for about 610s. So we'd be spending already 2x the amount on those batteries, plus those need more solar panels to charge them. And that would just be enough maybe to get through those hot summer weeks where you need electricity at that higher output. But again, you're already looking at $60,000, $70,000 in equipment now, and then you're also looking at all the additional cost of depreciation and really having to upkeep those batteries over the life of those batteries and potentially replacing them if they fail. Whereas grid power, yes, I don't want to tout the benefits of grid power because there are a lot of disadvantages of grid power as well. You can lose it if a tree branch falls miles away, things like that. But the advantage of that is that you don't have to maintain anything outside of your property, those transformers, everything like that. That's the power company. And you have no real spikes or deficits of electricity when it comes to the weather, because you are solely dependent upon sun when you're doing solar. And if you have a few cloudy days and you have guests there, it's really not a great solution as well. There's a lot of things that go into the thought process behind how to choose a utility solution for a business like this. For us, we chose off-grid power. It failed us. We lost a lot of money because of that. We have now solar panels and batteries that are not in use. So although we're not utilizing our solar panels and our batteries now, there is a way to repurpose them. We could either integrate them into the existing utility grid. That's, though, a long process and not that easy. But the most logical way would be to just choose something that would be very contained and not power hungry, such as powering up our shipping containers with lights and utilities for charging and things like that. And I think that's what we'll ultimately do. They're directly above the shipping containers. We can have 4 shipping containers fully powered up, and that would be a perfect way to utilize them. Our staff could use the power. Those shipping containers are off grid right now. They don't have any grid power running to them. So we do need electricity, and I think ultimately that's a great solution for them. And I think that's a great solution for a lot of other people that would be looking at DIY solar, is that if you're able to use it yourself and not have it be a guest-facing thing, then a smaller DIY solar solution does work. But if you have guests using something, hospitality guests in particular, they don't really care about your problems, right? Your problems are not their problems. They're paying to be there. And I think it's imperative that we provide an experience that is amazing. And that means consistent, reliable electricity. So unless we were to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars creating a really robust solar solution, the reality is that DIY solar is limited. Now, if you're in a colder climate and you don't require air conditioning, now solar could be a really good solution because you may not have to run air conditioning, and lights, charging devices, mini fridges, things like that. Those are really not utilizing a lot of electricity. So it really depends on your specific solution, your specific location, and your specific application for what you're trying to do. And if you're in a really hot climate where maybe it's hot most of the year, like in a desert or a rainforest, you have pros and cons of that, right? You have more sun, but you also have more electrical needs with that air conditioning, for instance. I think there's a lot of different things to consider as you look at DIY off-grid power solutions, but I would leave you with this. If you are off-grid entirely and you need a DIY solar solution, there are ways to do it. And the technology and the equipment out there now is far better than it's ever been. Some of these solutions that we've learned about and trialed and errored and failed with are not necessarily because they won't work. It's just because they didn't work for us. And there's also other interesting ways to get power. There's wind, there's even hydroelectric. You know, people that have little creeks can actually power little power plants with electricity. I've seen it, it's amazing. I think ultimately the reality is that you need to figure out what is gonna be best for your property and just go with that. And yes, you can tinker and you can toy with it like we have, but ultimately it's expensive. And if you make a mistake like we did, it's a quick and easy way to lose $20,000. All right, if you find this interesting, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that button, do your thing. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.